Welcome to Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the fifth dimension.
Welcome to another episode of Merkaba Chakras podcast. Today, we talk to spiritual teacher Bruce Bernstein, who studied the work of the late Dr. David R. Hawkins of Power versus Force. Now, Dr. David R. Hawkins was a spiritual teacher and mental health doctor who created the map of consciousness. And the map of consciousness is a kinesiology technique that allows people to measure truth versus falsehood based on the energy field that the subject radiates at in the current reality. Now, Bruce has been calibrating the energy field of U.S. politicians to see which has higher energy or not based on his own calibration technique that he developed using his connection to source within or consciousness. Now, he is working on a book that will be published shortly called Discover Your God Self, The Incredible Secrets of Your Spiritual Nature Revealed. So with that, Bruce, welcome to Merkaba Chakras.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Thank you for taking the invitation. I love to talk about consciousness and bring different perspectives to the table. And hopefully we can all piece this all together and get the best experience out of our current life now. So I'm very open to the different perspectives that you bring forth with your work as well about consciousness. Now, there's so much to discuss, but today we're going to get some insight into your current book project that is based off of your specific calibration technique that you developed and how to have a direct connection with your higher self. And again, I know I presented quite a bit of different modalities to have that connection to your higher self. So this is, again, another method in which you can try and work on having that connection to your higher self. So before we get into some of these other topics about consciousness and your calibration technique, Bruce, can you tell us your story for how you got into this work in the first place?
Well, that's a very long story, so I'll try to give you an abbreviated version. Back in the 1980s, I was living life the way most people at that time did, thinking I was happy, doing what you're supposed to do. You know, I graduated college, I went and got a job, I was hanging out with my friends and all those things. And underneath it all, I was very uncomfortable with myself, very uncomfortable with life. But that's not the facade that I put out there for people to see. They saw just a happy, well-adjusted person who was doing great, living in New York City. And but underneath it all, that wasn't true. Now, I didn't know that then. I thought that I was happy. I thought that's what it was all about. And then some rather odd things started to happen to get my attention. And that's when things started to change for me. And that's when I started to do some research, and I was kind of put on this path of spirituality. And at that point, I knew nothing about it. I mean, I was not religious at all. I was not really too interested in any of that. I was interested in keeping my good job, ultimately starting my own business and making a lot of money. That's what I really wanted to do. And the spiritual aspect of life was something that I really had no interest in. And then these weird things started to happen. For example, I was laying in my bed in my one-room efficiency apartment on 13th Street in the East Village of New York. And I was awakened in the middle of the night by a slap in the face. Literally, I was slapped in the face. And
Hilarious. You never hear that kind of stuff. That's a rude awakening.
It was a rude awakening. And at the time, I woke up and I felt the sting on my face. And I was like, what is that? What is going on here? And I'm looking around, I'm the only one in the room. Where did that come from? Another time I woke up, and this one I just remembered. I hadn't remembered this for a long time. It felt like there was something little scurrying around the outskirts of my bed, of my mattress, which was a queen size bed. And I was alone in the bed in the apartment. And it was almost like, little pitter patter of little feet, like a rat or something. And it was not that, clearly. And that was another weird thing that happened. And shortly after, these things started to happen to get my attention. And at first I was just writing them off as coincidences or just, bad dreams or whatever. And then, they kept happening. Things like that kept happening. And I found myself one day walking through the East Village down, I don't remember, 9th Street, 7th Street, somewhere around First Avenue. And I went into a little bookstore. And it was a metaphysical bookstore, actually, that specialized in Wiccan materials. I did not know anything about Wicca. I didn't know anything about metaphysical bookstore, but I was drawn to it. And I went downstairs and went in and was kind of drawn to some books on one of the shelves, and bought some of them. One of them, I think, was about chakras. Another one, which I knew nothing about, never even heard that word. Another one was about astral projection, which I had heard about and I was really interested in. I was like, okay, I want to do that. And I don't remember what the third one was. And I bought them and left and started reading. And that was kind of what started me on this path of exploring. And I'm convinced that, that was my inner being getting my attention and putting me on a path that I was supposed to be on in this lifetime. And many, many, many years later, that was 82 or 83 or something like that. So we're talking 30 years, 37, almost 40 years later, here I am, and I've been working on the spiritual aspect and learning things ever since.
Right, right. Now, didn't you also have a bike accident that was kind of kicked more into gear your journey?
I wouldn't say that it kicked it more into gear. I would say that it was very much a kind of a culmination of everything that I had already learned and experienced. Yes, the answer to that question is yes. Jumping way ahead, that happened in 2015. As a matter of fact, this coming Tuesday is my 5-year anniversary.
Congratulations on the bike accident.
It was October 20th, 2015. It's like my new birthday, I guess.
Yeah.
And, I was riding my bike as I did every day for exercise. I rode a road bike. I still ride a road bike. And I was hit from behind by somebody who was likely going about 45 miles an hour. And I was thrown, obviously, from the bike over the car, across the street. The bike went one way, I went another way. And it was a pretty bad accident. I had broken bones pretty much from head to toe, literally, starting with my forehead being broken, all the way down to the little toe on my left foot, and many in between. There were like somewhere between 12 to 15 broken bones. I only say that because there were several ribs broken, but in the reports that I saw, they never said how many. They just said several ribs being broken. And so I don't know how many of those are broken, but yeah, I had broke my humerus, my sternum, of course this. I had a burst fracture of T4 vertebrae in my back, as well as a compression fracture of L1 in my back. The surgeon who fixed my back said it was a miracle that I did not have spinal cord damage and wasn't paralyzed. I had a complete separation of my femur on my right leg, which now has almost as much, maybe even more titanium than my back still has in it. And the doctor who put that back together said it was a miracle I hadn't bled out and died when he went in and finally got to fix it, because we had to wait for a couple of days before they could do that one. He said that he'd never seen anything like it and I should have bled out and died, but I didn't. In addition to all those injuries, it's really what makes it more interesting is I had spoken, when I go out on my bike rides, I find it and when I used to run many years ago, I don't run anymore. Um, it's much easier for me to communicate with my inner selves, with my true self, with my God self. And several days, so when I go out on the bike, that's when I commune with that part of myself. It's almost like a meditative state for me. And several days before, I was having several health issues, and I said to my higher self, okay, I'm turning this over to you, which I'd never done before. That was a test for me, essentially. And I didn't put any caveats on it, other than I said, just don't hurt me. And so what's really interesting is I have no memory of any real pain from that whole thing. All of the things that I wanted to, there were three things in particular that I said, I need help with this. I just have been trying to heal it myself, and I'm not having any success. I haven't been going to doctors for any of it. And so I turned it over, and all of those things were addressed and are now considerably better, if not completely gone. And the, but what I had to live through to get to that point. So it's a careful what you wish for type of a thing. I put the caveat in, just don't hurt me. Well, the reality is I have no memory of any pain from any of that. The first memory that I have of pain is the first day that I got out of my bed when they were teaching me how to walk again, which is probably 3.5 weeks after I'd gotten there. And when you are in bed like that for that long, your muscles completely atrophy and you have to relearn how to walk. And I did. And so for me, you know, just that day, taking 2 steps that first day was considered more than enough. And then they put me back into bed. And that was the most difficult thing I ever had to do, which was getting out of bed at that moment, that first time. And when I got up, that's when I first experienced any real pain that I can recall.
Right, right. Well, good thing that you recovered and that consciousness did not give you any pain during that process. So I guess you did get what you want, but it's kind of like when you ask
Right.
the genie and they're like, your wishes.
That's exactly right. And I would not have wanted it to occur that way. I would have wanted a much more subtle and enjoyable experience to take care of those 3 issues. That would have been much nicer. That's what I was
Right.
expecting. I was expecting some kind of miracle where all of a sudden I would wake up the next day and everything was just okay.
Uh-huh.
Not what happened.
Now what
So
happened? You got
careful what
me.
you ask for. You really have to be very specific when you ask things.
Yeah, sometimes the universe are like, okay, well, I will check this box and this box and this box, but that leaves it open for all this other great stuff. So
You ask
now,
3 things. You never specified a method.
yeah, that's like what the genie always says. Well, you never told me how am I supposed to do it? So, well, let's shift from that. Now along your quest for spiritual insights and knowledge, you ended up coming across and studying and meeting with the late Dr. David R. Hawkins, who developed the map of consciousness, and you know, which is a scale that he used to use applied kinesiology to measure truth versus falsehood. What was it like meeting Dr. Hawkins?
It's very interesting and very enjoyable. He was not a very friendly individual. You know, he was very businesslike. There were 2 meetings, I would say. There was one, a private meeting, a 30-minute private session that I had with him. I may have been one of the last people to actually have that privilege. And then there was 2 days later, an all-day seminar that went from maybe 10 till 4 in the afternoon or something like that, where he was doing his thing. And there was a break for lunch in between. And then after that, I went up and spoke to him as well. I think I went up and spoke to him during the break, and he was like in some kind of trance or something. And I was like standing in front of him. Finally, I said, Dr. Hawkins? And he was like, hello? It's almost like I even though his eyes were open and he seemed to be looking at me, he seemed to be unaware that I was there, which was kind of interesting. I mean, I just saw him a day before, and I was just going over to say, hey, how you doing, kind of a thing. I wasn't ready for that moment where he just kind of snapped out of something and kind of saw me, and at first didn't even recognize who I was.
Yeah, I watch all of any footage I can, video footage of Dr. Hawkins, and I've noticed that he's kind of in and out.
It was interesting. And what was even more interesting, and I found fascinating, he actually smoked cigarettes and was doing it unabashedly. He had no fear of it. Of course, he wasn't smoking the kind that most people would buy. He was smoking some other all natural kind of cigarette that didn't have chemicals in it. Somebody asked him about it
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
seminar. And he mentioned something like, well, the thing that's really the most dangerous about that is the chemicals in the, the regular manufactured cigarettes or
yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
He
He
wasn't
smokes the natural
recommending
hemp.
those. No, it wasn't hemp. It was tobacco. It was
Oh,
tobacco.
okay.
And he wasn't recommending that people do that, by the way.
Hmm.
He just had attained a high enough level of consciousness where his body was not going to be affected by things of that nature that he did to it. And so, but yeah, he was a very interesting person. What he spoke about in that particular seminar was very interesting stuff. It was about going through the final door to enlightenment when you fully let go of the ego self or transcend it. And it was really kind of interesting because at one point I got the feeling, am I in the right place here? Is this like a Jim Jones, drink the Kool-Aid and we're all going to die kind of a thing? Because he was speaking in those kinds of terms in this particular moment. It wasn't that, clearly, and that was never something that would have happened. But I was sitting there listening to him and thinking, oh, this is kind of bizarre at times. When we had our,
Yeah, he can get really esoteric, and if you're not in the space of kind of where the teaching is, it you can see it as kind of like, is this a Jim Jones kind of thing? Where it's not, where he's really talking about ego death and letting go of ego identity and embracing consciousness.
well, it was
But
almost like a cult type of a thing when he was talking at this one particular juncture. It only lasted for about 10 minutes where that kind of struck me that way. I was listening intently to him. This was like back in, I don't know, 2002, maybe, something like that.
mm-hmm.
And but during my meeting, my private meeting with him, it was nothing like that at all. It was, in fact, I came with a whole list of questions I'd written down and was hoping to get some answers to and to discuss. And he immediately stole that opportunity from me as soon as we sat down and I started to ask a question. He's like, oh, no. We're not going to do that. We're just going to sit here and share the energy. And we did talk about that.
That's perfect.
And he asked me questions and I asked him some, but none of the questions I wanted to ask. And as I'm sitting there, I felt myself actually feeling like I was floating above the chair that I was sitting in because the energy in that room was that profound. Same thing occurred in the seminar where the energy was so great and I was in the presence of it for so long that later on that evening, like 1 o'clock in the morning, I was speaking with a friend and she could feel the energy coming off of me. She started
Right.
to feel it.
It's the
And
energy of the teacher.
yeah,
It's the
and it was,
energy of his aura field.
I never even thought about what it was. I just knew it was the energy that was emanating from him. And it could have been that, I have no idea. But it was quite pleasant, by the way. There was nothing unpleasant about it. It was quite.
Right. Now, you went from studying or studying and knowing of his method, and I've been using Dr. Hawkins' method of kinesiology for over 20 years as another. I use a lot of different modalities to kind of fact check, support different things that I'm working on. And his is one of the modalities. And Dr. Hawkins' modality is everybody has to, who's doing it, the two people have to be at least 200 points or higher in his map of consciousness in terms of integrity, which I think he said there was only maybe 15 to 20% of humanity or society at the time that he was doing it. Radiates at, and then they can't be atheists. They have to have a belief in consciousness or something higher themselves, because you have, in order to ask consciousness, you have to have a belief in consciousness, and then that you can't be biased to any questions because that would kind of off skew it as well. So I've used it, but you you went off and you created your own kinesiology method, or you're not a kinesiologist, but your own method of calibrating things. So can you tell us the journey of how you came about creating your own method to measuring the energy of different subjects?
I can't take credit for it. I won't say that I created it. I would say that it was given to me. It was shown to me. Um, Going back to kinesiology, in my life, I've tended to be not a loner. I love people and I enjoy being around them, but I spend a lot of time alone. And so that presented a problem in terms of kinesiology when you're supposed to do it with two people, because there were not two people around very often. And as you said, the finding another person who calibrated above 200, that was never too difficult for me. I seemed to attract those people to me, so that was not really much of a problem. But they were not necessarily into these things. And, I never felt like it was my job to impose myself on them or make them feel uncomfortable in any way. So I rarely would ask them. I did do some of that with my sister-in-law and some other people. But so that created a problem. So what I first then learned of a technique to do applied kinesiology using your fingers by yourself.
Right, muscle testing your fingers. Yeah, that's a very common one. Mm-hmm.
And it does work. It's not, I don't know if it's as accurate as using two people or not, because I never tested one versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
I found that it does work, but it did have its limitations at times. And I think that a predisposed feeling about what an answer might or might not be does tend to get in the way of the accuracy of that at times. And so I was always a little frustrated because I wanted to test, as you said that you were doing, working to validate things that you're reading or validate things that you're hearing or learning or understanding them better just by testing one aspect or another. It's just another tool. Like meditation is a tool to higher consciousness. This is a tool. It's not something to be relied upon, but it is something that has value and that can be used in an appropriate way. And so one day I was in the shower and one of my little external friends came to me and said, I want you to try this. And I did while I was in the shower. And I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then he said, okay, use that now. And that was it. There wasn't much instruction and there weren't a whole lot.
What did you try? What did you try?
It's just I can't really teach that process to you in a second, but it's all about thought, the energy of thought, and using the body as a communication mechanism, listening to the body for your answers and basically it started really as black and white, true or false. Just as the applied kinesiology did, but then it really it moved past that. I still use it mostly in that way, but there are other times when well, let's just say that it's a bridge. It's a tool. It's a bridge to being able to speak, communicate with your God self and your true self, your higher self within. And when I say speak, I'm talking about having an internal conversation within your body and mind. You're not speaking out loud, although you can, and actually hear an answer. And so this is like a stepping stone and a tool to being able to do that. And that's something that I will ultimately create an online course, and I will teach people all about that, because I think it's important for people to do that. Now, not everybody would be successful, just as in applied kinesiology, where 200 is the level, not everybody is going to be able to immediately speak and hear their inner self in that way. Right. It takes a little bit of time. But the one thing that I have found and tested with my process is that you don't have to be over 200 to use it and to use it accurately. And it helps, but it's not a requirement, which I always thought was good, because who would need a process like this the most? It would be the people who calibrate the lowest, so that they have a sense of what's right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false. And to me, so having a tool that people who are not of higher consciousness already can use would be, I think, of great value in lifting the consciousness of the planet and of themselves, and ultimately of the planet.
Right. Let's get into some of your calibrations because you bring up some really good points. Because, I mean, just like Dr. Hawkins said in his work, about 80% of humanity is below 200. And so, of course, we're going to kind of run around and chase our tails for a while until we figure it out, one hard knock lesson after another.
We've been
But
doing a lot of that, yes. Many, many
yeah,
centuries.
the children do not always listen to what's good for them.
They don't say
Um,
that.
yeah, but sometimes that they don't listen and they have to learn on the hard way. So we're an infinite anyway. So
We
what's the
prefer
rush?
that.
It's all about the journey anyways.
Our human nature prefers to learn things the hard way, unfortunately.
Yeah, usually most of the time, I know I found this with my work and studying other people's work when it comes to the clients that they work with. Most of the time, people do what's right or good for them when they are left no other choices. They've already run the
Which is an
they've-
unfortunate way to live. I mean, wouldn't it be much more pleasant if you could just figure it out right away,
yeah, you would think, or
as
people
opposed to
have
going through?
already gone down that road. They've shown you the things not to do, the things to avoid, but you still have to learn it for yourself. So it's okay, it's okay. It's all on a journey. It's part of the
Well,
Dharma that we play in. So
that's exactly right. It's just it's what it really comes down to in this particular instance is the ego self is trying to distract us from reality. And
right,
so we'll play these games and put up all these hurdles that we must overcome and create all these puzzles that we have to put together. But the reality is that's not the way it all really works. That's just we following the wrong voice within and being led by it. And so it takes us on all these different places until we finally hit a dead end and we figure there's got to be a better way.
right. And then, so let's get to the calibrations because, on your website when using your method and, when you silence the mind chatter and you open the heart to consciousness and ask your question, that what answer comes in, it may lead you a little further down the rabbit hole. You may not get the full answer right then and there. And that's happened as well. But in your method, you're getting a straight answer. So, on your website, you use your method to calibrate U.S. politicians at this time. And my husband and I have calibrated some of these U.S. politicians, and your calibrations are very, very close to the calibrations that my husband and I have had as well. So the method is right in the same ballpark as Dr. Hawkins. So let's go over some of these calibrations. And can you tell us again why you are releasing some of these very controversial calibrations on U.S. politicians at this time in the U.S.?
I don't consider them to be controversial, and it's
Okay.
not my intention to be controversial with them. It's not my intention to tell if you notice on the website, I don't tell anybody what to vote for or who to vote for. I'm just putting the information out there, and it's up to you to make your choice.
Right.
In our current day, the world has gotten, in the last 20 years really, but certainly more over the last 4, where truth and falsehood have become a very blurry picture. They've melded together and nobody knows what's true and what reality is anymore. So I felt, okay, if the world is going to get a handle on this, we need to start having a better understanding of where people are coming from. And obviously, the map of consciousness is a very good measurement system for that because Dr. Hawkins laid it all out. It's an algorithm system, and the higher you are on the scale, the greater your level of consciousness in an algorithmic way. It's not just step by step, where 10 is 10 times higher than 1, 10 is maybe 100 times higher than 1. And so it was my feeling that if we understood, and I was intended to do a whole lot more before the election, but I got sidetracked with the book that I'm writing, and I just felt like,
Which needs to be finished
right.
because
And
it's
then
a
I'm going
good
to go back to
contribution
these
to the.
calibrations. I wanted to calibrate MSNBC. I calibrated Fox News. I wanted to calibrate MSNBC. And there were a whole host of other political entities and beings and people that I wanted to talk about and calibrate. But I felt that it was important if you knew a politician who you like is calibrating at 140. Well, what does that tell you about the politician and
Right.
his willingness, shall we say,
Right.
to tell you the truth?
Right.
And if you are gravitating toward that particular individual, whoever they may be, what does it tell you about yourself and your own calibration? And maybe you should look inside yourself and see, okay, maybe there's some things I can do to increase my consciousness and reach for greater happiness and health. Because that's ultimately what comes with greater consciousness, is increased happiness and health.
Right, right. So let's go over, and just for people who are not aware of what the scale that we're talking about, with the map of consciousness scale that Dr. Hawkins did, the calibration technique that Bruce Bernstein, his method to calibrate the energy field, is a different method than Dr. Hawkins' method of calibrating energy field. And then they take those calibration, the number of whatever energy it radiates at, and they measure it against the map of consciousness, which goes from 0 up to 1,000, which is like Buddhahood, which is like you've mastered the matrix, or
In this realm.
in this realm. So that's just the basic premise. So the avatars, the luminaries of the past, like Yeshua, Buddha, Vishnu, those figures in history reach 1,000 according to the map of consciousness. And
And
so,
others as well, by the way,
and many,
who are lesser
many,
known.
yeah, many others, many women, many men, many others. So I just giving you some basic ideas, so if you can do your research on that, but that's the basic premise. Now I'm going to go over some calibrations, and again, keep this in mind. We're not telling you what to vote for, who to vote for, or anything else like that. It is a method that is available to use and measure, whatever topic you are considering. So, so Donald Trump, out of 0 to 1,000, you got 146. He didn't even reach 200.
That was
Not,
actually the second time I calibrated him too. The first time I think it was a little bit higher, and over the years between the two calibrations, his level of consciousness did say, call it reverse.
right. So
Dropped in level.
200, right. So just so everybody knows, when you're using this method, 200, according to the map of consciousness scale that Dr. Hawkins created in his lifetime, is a basic benchmark of integrity. That's an integrous person. They're probably not going to stab you on the back or do any kind of like, lesser character things. That's somebody who is going to come through when they say they're going to do something. They're going to do the best they can to come through with it, or they're not going to take up that offering. Okay, those are the type of people. So just integrity. So
Well,
200.
it's also about intention. In
Right.
other words, what are your intentions? What are you really going for? If you are below 200, you have very little interest, if any at all, in anybody else.
Right. You're still
Yourself.
ego-minded.
You're interested in yourself and in grabbing and taking whatever it is that you can get for yourself. And it doesn't matter to you what the consequences are to anybody else.
Right. And just so everybody knows, when they're looking at the map of consciousness, 0 to 100 is basic survival animal instincts, like a snake or, whatever. 200 is integrity. So this is what we're going through. And then above 200 goes up the scales. So,
It is the level of enlightenment, the first opening level of enlightenment. And then there are many levels in between.
right.
Just to clarify one thing, I'm using the same map of consciousness as a scale, rather than using applied kinesiology as the method to calibrate something to the scale. I'm just using this new method that I hope to
Yes.
teach people
Right.
in the future. And
Right.
so it's the same. It's all the same. It's just a different method being used to do the calibrations.
Right, but we're measuring it under against the map of consciousness scale, but it's a different method. So if you're not resonating with the Dr. Hawkins method. Bruce Bernstein has another method to calibrate that you can try as well. And then there's other methods to calibrate too. I know in Buddhism we use gamma brainwave meditation to calibrate things. So there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that are available to you. Mike Pence, you got 212, just barely over the hump. Not enough to have much of a backbone, but barely over. So that explains a lot right there. Joe Biden, 433. So much, much higher, not to the point of enlightenment. Enlightenment is, I think, 600 in the map of consciousness.
Correct.
And anything over 600 is really hard for people, according to Dr. Hawkins, to radiate at much higher than that while they're living, because they feel a lot of energy and a lot of pain. So, just so
Well,
people,
Hawkins himself calibrated higher than that.
yeah, and he felt a lot of pain. He complained about it all the time. I'm telling you, I'm like a dog on a bone when I follow something. I follow to every sentence. But okay, so Kamala Harris, 429. So very close to Joe Biden. This is the most intellectual people kind of get into the 400s, logical thinking. Now, we also have Elizabeth Warren at 525. And that is very interesting that you got 525 for Elizabeth Warren, because Kamala and Elizabeth Warren were the two running mates that Joe Biden had chosen. And I find it very interesting that he chose the one closest to his calibration than the one that's like almost 100 points higher in energy than his own.
And that's interesting. You know, I hadn't even considered that. You know, when I do the calibrations, I don't sit there and analyze them afterwards. And you mentioned it to me when we first spoke. And I thought, oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. I really wish you would have, you could measure or calibrate the energy field of Bernie Sanders,
It
because
was my intention to do that. I just didn't get to it because I decided I needed to spend less time writing blog posts and I needed to finish my book, and then I'll go back to the blog
yeah,
post.
because I calibrate, my husband and I, we calibrated Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to be the dream team, because they
Oh,
were
yeah.
very, very close in energy fields, and we called them the dream team. But of course, it is no surprise that they didn't become the dream team reality ticket, because the consciousness level of the population that is voting is going to vote for typically the one that's closest to what they are at. So, which,
I would suggest that that's a fairly astute observation. That yeah, you know that
yeah,
they could have been just a little too high on the scale, and people were not they weren't feeling it, so to speak.
they weren't feeling it. Yeah, and that I remember many seminars of Dr. Hawkins who would say the people in a specific area get the politicians that are closest to them,
That they deserve, yeah.
that that exactly the word, that they get what they deserve. It sounds
Right.
kind of mean, but
Based
as a
upon the energy fields that they're putting out.
so what I found interesting in that calibration that you did between that is that with the dream team of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, that many people consider the dream team, they really resonate with a lot of younger voters and not so much older voters. And I wonder why the difference. You know, is
Well,
the younger generation or coming into the fold of higher calibration? That's why they resonate with these higher figures. I
yes,
mean, what is it?
yes. They in the millennial group in particular, there were a lot of higher consciousness beings born into that age category.
And what's the age category of that you found?
I never,
Like, found, so millennials or close to millennials.
yeah,
So
millennials and younger. I mean, there's a lot of higher consciousness beings being born into bodies at, you know, basically starting, let's say 30 years ago, and you know, and continuing today. Not all of them, clearly,
yeah,
but there's more of the, you know, of higher consciousness beings entering bodies at this point. And when I say higher, it's more in terms of quantity, but also in terms of calibrated level of consciousness. So
That's really good to hear. That's really good to hear, because that actually falls in line with in Buddhism and in many indigenous beliefs. The beliefs are that old souls and wise beings are incarnating in mass, and they're coming in with their wisdom. And so that makes sense
it
that they
does
will
make
have
sense.
high energy fields.
Yes, and it also makes sense in that that's kind of what the world needs, that if it is to survive.
Yeah, so there is hope, everyone. The young generation, millennials, and around this gap and younger, we're getting higher energy people, and they are gravitating to higher energy figures.
Now, let's not
So,
mislead people, though. That does not to say that if you're a millennial, you're a higher
yeah,
consciousness.
right. But there's more than
There's only a
before.
difference between maybe 5% higher consciousness beings being born into bodies 50 years ago to maybe 10 or 15%. That still leaves another 85%. Well, it's
Yeah,
everybody's
that's
job
true.
to grow and improve in consciousness and increase in consciousness. Everybody,
Right, right.
regardless of where you are. Even if you're at 1,000, you're even more so, you're striving to do more because
Exactly,
you realize
exactly.
what you don't know.
So have
But
hope, people. Have hope. Have hope. The children and the young adults are. It's not lost.
it's
So,
not lost yet, but you got to keep working at it.
yeah.
And even those that feel like they're in a good place, if you're not walking on water, you're not there yet.
Okay, so let's go. Now, the next one that you got, and some people will be like, no, those are wrong calibrations, and they're going to really argue with it, but I'm just going to say what it is. So, Barack Obama, 565. Michelle Obama, 531. Like attracts like Dr. Hawk, birds of a feather. I mean, they're both in the fives. Of course they would.
And they were calibrated at 2 different times, and I didn't remember which one was which, or where the calibrated level was.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah. So very, very common. I mean, and I know in
and
if
to
you
me,
get
there's
your
nothing
Merc.
controversial about it, though. If you look at what the man tried to do, he was never working for himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was always trying to make things better for others. Now, you may not agree with his policies and the way he tried to do that. That's a matter of debate, how to best do that. But there can be no question that he wasn't trying to improve the lives of others.
Right, right. Yeah, some people is going they really will have issue because they think the opposite of your calibrations. But these are the calibrations, people. So the next one is Fox News Channel. You actually calibrated the whole channel, huh?
Well, I did it as individuals and then the channel as a group. If you remember in Hawkins' books, he calibrated the Democratic Party, he calibrated democratic philosophy, and then he did calibrate a couple of people. He calibrated George W. Bush, and he calibrated the guy he ran against. What just slipped out of my head? Vietnam veteran.
McCain?
No, prior.
Whew, you're really going back in time for me, honey. I don't know. But yeah, I remember he calibrated a lot of people. He even calibrated Napoleon and kind of went into some fun stuff as well.
Yeah. Um,
But Fox News Channel, you got 136. That's pretty low. No wonder it's entertainment and not news. They even say that on the prompt. I know I think that was funny. I was like, okay, well, 136 is barely above like 100, which I said 0 to 100 is basically primal. It's like a
that
Komodo
one
dragon
shocked me
trying to
too.
stick out for itself, trying to
It shocked
survive.
me too that it was that low as well. But then you must remember that they did invent fake news. And
Ooh, that's
so
gonna be controversial for some people because
I'm sure they
they
won't
suck
believe
on it
that,
like it's a lifeline, like it's
but
the
the
truth.
reality,
But
right. But the reality is there's no such thing as fake news until they came in and started making things up, which
yeah,
did happen.
No, I've seen some stuff where different countries will say that did not happen in our country. Stop reporting it on your channel. But yeah, I thought that was really kind of interesting that it was 136, because some people are going to really have a challenge with it being so low. I mean, that's 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 almost at bare survival. Like, that's bad news bear.
I expected it to be just over 200 before I went in and did it. So I was very
That's
surprised.
like doomsday all the time. Turn the channel, every channel is, everything that's talked about is doomsday and fear porn. And is that what every single one of the dialogue is for show after show, is doomsday, fear porn, how we're gonna get down the train wreck?
I don't
Half
know.
the
I don't
parts,
watch it.
I don't know.
I don't watch it, so I couldn't really say.
Yeah, but some people, that's what they, and so it is interesting that you get a lot of really extreme viewpoints from that channel. So I found that very interesting. Now, you also went through Andrew Cuomo, the New York City governor, and he's at 499. That's
Yeah, I felt at the time when I did that calibration, that's when the pandemic was really in full swing in New York, and he was doing a really good job. And it was easy to see
it was
that he
easy
was
to
doing
see
a
he
really
cared
good
for the
job.
people.
Right. And so I
Yeah,
said, oh,
yeah,
let's calibrate him just to see, see where he is. And so that's why
yeah.
I chose him at that particular time. There was no other reason other than, that's a very pressing issue at that
Right,
time.
right.
And
And
people should
now
know that he
remember,
can be trusted when he talks.
right, right. And now remember, people, these scales are not fixed. I mean, people's energy fields can expand or contract depending on, what they're doing or working on. So, now you also calibrate the U.S. Supreme Court, the institution itself, and that calibrate at 677, which is really high. So the concept and the institution of the U.S. Supreme Court function or body is right there at the level of enlightenment. Now, the things that come through and the people that come through are not at the level of enlightenment, and they're
Absolutely
trying to
true.
live up to those standards.
Well, in some cases, they're not even trying so hard. It's the concept of what it is, and of essentially a key component, or what was a key component of the United States government, which also calibrated. I haven't calibrated it, but I think Hawkins mentioned it. Calibrates fairly high compared to other governments around the world. It did. What it does today, I couldn't tell you. I
Right,
would
right.
doubt that it would calibrate to the same level, but the concept of it still should be relatively high, because the concept behind it
The
is a
principles
high
behind it is high.
thing. Right.
Yeah. The
But the
principles and
individuals in the
living up
Supreme
to
Court,
principles are two different things.
yes, and the individuals in the Supreme Court, I would be hard pressed to think of even one that I would even test to see if they calibrated above 600. I'm guessing none of them do. And there's good reason for that. Same thing in politics. You're not going to find people who calibrate over that level doing much public service like that, because they don't have the patience for it or the desire to do it. They just much rather live a much more settled and happy and anonymous life.
Yeah, I remember listening to Hawkins, and he would say, there's always that grandma in Russia that's calibrating at 800, just guarding away at this high field, and it's just peace and love and all in her neighborhood. So I totally get that. Now, so I'm going to run through some of these really quickly too, because I want to get into the questions about your books. So you got Chief Justice John G. Roberts at 399, and you have the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg at 444, which 444 is an angel number, so maybe she got her wings on the other side. I don't know. But bless her heart. But yeah, she's up there. And then you have the Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh at 316. So a lot of these Supreme Justices are over 200 integrists, but are they high enough to have a backbone and do what's right than to
That's a
be
very
pushed
different
around?
That's a very
Because
different thing. I calibrated the governor of Florida, where I live, is in Florida, Ron DeSantis, and he calibrated. I don't remember what the number is, but I think it was over 300. And but based on his behavior, you would never think that he would calibrate that high. So one thing, when you talk about somebody's calibrated level of consciousness, A, that has nothing at all to do with intelligence, and B, or knowledge or education, and B, it also is not necessarily, until you get to higher levels, going to be a major factor in determining behavior. When you
Yeah.
get, because the ego self is still very prevalent in those lower
Yeah.
levels, and
Yeah.
that's where people are living from. And you have not at that point transcended the ego. Even at 550, you've not transcended the ego yet. So
Gotta-
the reality is that the for a person that calibrates in the 300s, they can do the right thing. Everybody can. Are they more likely to or less likely to than somebody who is below 200? Yeah, probably they're more likely to, but that's not a guarantee that they're going to do the right thing.
But would you say that if somebody does the right thing, that more of the right things every time they make a decision than being pushed and pulled by external influences, that would help raise their energy field?
If they're doing the right thing according to what their personal understanding is, that I don't know that it would raise it, but it wouldn't lower it.
Okay.
If they're making choices based upon outer world pressure, in other words, if you're a judge and you're hearing a case, you know what the law is, and you're supposed to forget what spirituality says. You're supposed to be administering the law. And so if you are abiding by the law, then that's a good thing. Now, if you're interpreting the law, as the Supreme Court justices are often asked to do,
Yeah.
they're not abiding by it like a lower court judge is. They're creating new law
Right.
essentially through their interpretations of the current laws. And so when
And
that happens, that's a different realm.
right, because interpretation can come with bias,
Yes, and
and
that's where
bias can come with pressure, and it
exactly.
may not be the best solution of all the solutions.
And so,
So
well, a higher calibrating judge isn't necessarily going to make what is a right call, depending upon what the outer world influences are pressing upon him or her.
right. So you went through the U.S. Congress Calibrate 138.
That surprise anybody.
I'm not surprised. No one would never get anything done. They always merkats. No, like I said, 0 to 100. The closer you get to 100, it's just primal instincts. You're
Right.
never going to get to the higher levels of consciousness and logic and reason and sensibility. It's just
Now that's
watching a
not the
cat fight.
institution when I calibrated that. That's the current
It's watching
Congress.
a cat fight, you guys. No wonder we haven't got our stimulus and everybody else in the world has. Okay, I'm going to run through these last ones really quickly. The Republican members of the U.S. Congress, 212, barely above integrity. Democratic members of U.S. Congress, 223, very close to each other. No wonder it's really hard to pick and choose.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, when they're fighting, that brings down the whole institution. Whatever it was.
oh, if you like a good chicken fight or cat fight, just watch U.S. politics, because they're pretty much they're the same animals, just wearing different outfits. So,
People have
all
said
right, well,
I should run for political office, and I said no. There's nothing about that appeals to me. I don't want to get into the arena and fight like a child with these other people over silly things. It's just
right.
not
So,
not that the
right.
work that they do could not be important. It is, but they fight over silly things.
Yeah, right. So everybody, I'm just gonna leave. Those are really fun calibrations. U.S. politics is always going to be entertaining to calibrate and watch. And so, David R. Hawkins always said when he calibrated most politicians, he said they're all mercats. They're all mercats people. It's just cats fighting. So they're all mercats. And my husband's grandma used to always say, people would do what they do. Just let it go, forgive and move on with your life. So anyways, that's kind of fun. But so everybody, politics is not the end all be all. There are other areas of life that you can work on that will make more of a difference. That isn't a bunch of chicken fighting. Okay, so look into some of the other areas of life. So now let's get into shift focus and talk about your book. Can you explain what the paradox of man is?
Well, I don't know that I would label it as the paradox of man, but that's not a bad way to say it. I just call it what Hawkins called it, which was the duality within. And essentially it's the love versus fear. Hawkins never wrote this, but I came to this understanding many, many years ago, that there's only two things inside of us. There's love and there's fear. And every emotion comes from one or the other. If you take it down to its most fundamental and basic aspect, every emotion is based in one or the other, love or fear. So that's the duality within, and that's the paradox that we have to figure out ourselves. What voice do we want to listen to? And my book lays out for people, I did change the name since you and I last spoke. It's Discovering Your God Self, not Discovering Your God Self, the hidden secrets of whatever it was. I've forgotten what it is right now. It's a really long name. The hidden secrets of your spiritual nature revealed. There, I got it. And it covers the 5 different elements within each and every one of us. And those 5 elements are the same in each and every one of us. We're all exactly the same inside. And what most people probably don't realize, or if they've heard it, they don't understand it. There's God essence energy within each one of us. That's what keeps us alive. That's what gives us life. But then there's this whole other part of us. And that's the individual nature that we have, which I call the individualized self. And that consists of 2 components, the ego self, which we've mentioned, and the true self. And the ego self is all fear, and the true self is all love. And my book goes into all of that to help people to really understand that, to wrap their heads around it, so to speak, and to be able to then use this information in a way to make better choices in their life, and ultimately to elevate their own consciousness on their own. It's a tool for people to understand how they can go through life and increase their consciousness. And what's the point of that? Well, you're going to have a happier life. Most people are miserable. They don't know they're miserable, but they're always searching for the next big thrill, and they substitute that for happiness. And so the goal is not to be searching for happiness. The goal is to be happy. And then when something great happens, you have a thrill. So that's just icing on the cake. As opposed to most people, well, what do? They're happy. All of a sudden, okay, that fades away, as false happiness does. So now they're looking around for the next thing. Okay, I'm going to call my friend. That'll make me happy. Or let's go out to a bar. That'll make me happy. Or I'm going to go buy a new pair of shoes because that'll make me happy. And all those things do make you joyful, not happy, in a temporary way, and it's fleeting. As fast as it comes, it goes away. But real happiness doesn't fade. It's always there. It's constant. It's steady. It's not an up and a down like you have with those types of other events. It's just a very steady way to live where you're in a nice, even space, which is not to say that you don't ultimately or eventually get angry at times. And that's just the ego raising its hand and saying, remember me? Here I am. But the goal is to transcend that, find that happiness within. And this book talks a lot about the components of all of that. And if people want to learn a little bit more about that, you can see over my head my website address, brucebernstein.me/podcast1. That will take people to a page where they can get this, a little report that I have that'll give them a little bit more insight into the book. And ultimately they can, if they do it right away, they'll be able to sign up for a free copy of the book once the book is published, because I will be having some free copies available for some folks. And I will also have a link to this podcast and the video of it on that page. But that's the book. That's what it's all about. And I think people will find it to be very grounded and very accessible. I tried to write things in a way, which was not always easy, to explain what are very difficult concepts for some to understand.
Right.
Explain it in a way that would be accessible to them, so they're able to say, oh yeah, I understand that. I get that.
Well, let me ask you one last question. What is what is consciousness?
Consciousness is everything. There's a scientist who wrote a book. His name was, again, with the names. Um, well, the name of the book is, now that's out of my head as well. It'll come to me. Um, Biocentrism is the name of the book. And the author's name is Dr. Robert, what's his last name? I've forgotten. I read his books a while ago. But basically, he's used a scientific approach and scientific methods using physics and things like that to prove consciousness. And that consciousness is everything. And that, from a spiritual perspective, has always been known, but he actually kind of talks about it from a very scientific perspective. And essentially, everything is made up of energy. Energy is consciousness. If you want to use the term God, God is consciousness. When I talk about the God self, I'm talking about your individual portion of God that's within you that is connected to what I call the greater God, which is everything else. It's all connected. It's all one. It's all consciousness, ultimately. And that's what the book is about. And that's what consciousness really is. It's
Right.
We are connected. Now, we don't know that we're connected, many of us, because we've lost touch with that aspect of ourselves. This book, presumably, will help people to start to get in touch with that aspect of themselves so they can open that back up for themselves.
Right. And to follow with that, does consciousness, since everything in existence, you, I, the trees, the stars, the air, all is an aspect of consciousness. Does consciousness create reality?
That's a very interesting question. And I would say consciousness is reality. We create reality through our desires, our thoughts, and consciousness works with us to create the reality that we desire, be it good reality or bad reality. There is no judgment. Consciousness doesn't judge. God doesn't judge. We judge, but God does not judge. So if an ego self desire, which happens to be, as we would define it, evil, is in somebody's mind, God or consciousness is going to help them create that. God doesn't.
Oh, wait a minute, Bruce. If if somebody firmly believes in negativity, like hell and demons and all that kind of stuff, they will create that experience for themselves?
Not necessarily in that way, no. But as
Okay.
Hawkins spoke about heaven and hell, he talked about people coming from different levels of energy, different energy fields. And so, as he very aptly described it, somebody who's calibrating at 600, who landed in an energy field of 100 after they died, that would be hell to them.
Yeah.
And somebody who's calibrating at 100 landed in a field that's calibrating at 600 where everybody's in love and it's angels and everything's good. That
Everything
would be hell
works.
for them. That would be hell for them. So we
That
all,
is so funny that you think you would think that somebody at a 100 at a bare survival rate going to an existence where everybody's at 600 above and everything's working and flowing just fine and manifesting easily, that's hell for them because why is all that good stuff?
they would hate it. They prefer to pull out a gun and shoot somebody.
Because that's what they know.
Right. That's what they're used to. That's where their
That's what
consciousness is.
they
That's their
know.
frame of reference.
They like the duality. They like the polarity.
Right.
They like the
And
push and the pull.
Hawkins explained that, yeah. And so that's what I would call consciousness.
Oh, that's a great explanation. So everybody, that's a really great explanation. And you're going to hear it from so many people in this space that consciousness is aware and knowing, and it's everyone and everything in existence. And it's all connected. It's all one. And it will also give you the freedom to have your own journey for your own evolution. But at the end of the day, anything that you experience is a reflection of consciousness. So your reality that you're experiencing is a reflection of your own level of consciousness. And Bruce Bernstein's work and calibration method is another tool in the bag of tricks that you can learn, and if it and apply to any questions that you have as well as any of the other ones that you may have come across or kind of dabble into as well. So you know, Bruce, I think we've presented a lot of really critical information for people to consider. Some of this is going to be a challenge for some people because it does not fit within their current paradigm, but that is for them and for everyone's journey. And, you know, we all go to the same place. So however down the rabbit hole you go, good luck. But, you know, thank you again for a very fun interview, and for information on Bruce Bernstein's offerings, please visit his website. It's right there, which is brucebernstein.me for those podcast listeners who aren't seeing the video. And again, thank you kindly for listening to another enlightening conversation. Until next time, blessings.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Merkaba Chakras, where we talk Buddhism in the 5th dimension. For more information about today's guest, please go to the show description. For more information about Vaughn's metaphysical work, please go to merkabachakras.com. The views expressed today are for entertainment purposes and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or replace any medical or legal advice. Don't forget to subscribe for more interviews about the 5th dimension. Until we meet again, blessings.